Rabbi Bellows, you want me to begin? You all set? We good to go? Can you hear me?
Okay, that was a little taste of music. Over to you, Nina. I think we'll probably have people who continue to trickle in.
Absolutely. You should all know we had about 70, 80 people or so signing up. So we're anticipating more. But if not now, as we all know, we sign up, many of us knowing that we can't come because we hope to get those recordings. And so we will be sending a recording out as well. So welcome to the fourth webinar in the Weeks of Learning and Doing webinar series, hosted by the MAS-T Conservative Movements Environmental Sustainability Initiative. I am Nina Beth Carden, chairperson of the Sustainability Initiative. The initiative was launched on Tu B'Shvat through a generous grant from Kakal, the Karen Kayemet Yisrael, to promote sustainable practices within conservative movement institutions. Our first step was to expand the conservative movement's partnership with Adama's Jewish Climate Leadership Coalition. That program supports Jewish organizations in their efforts to create climate action blueprints to guide their sustainability practices. To date, almost 70 congregations have registered for JCLC. And I just want to give a shout out to Judith Lasker, whose daughter is the staff person for the Sustainability Initiative. So we're delighted to have you with us, Judith. The webinar series offers various approaches to and resources about environmental sustainability from a Jewish perspective. Today's webinar, as you know, is about cultivating spiritual courage and confronting the climate crisis, and is co-sponsored with Dayenu. The climate crisis is much more than an environmental crisis, an existential crisis. Theoretically, it is a very personal crisis that affects so many of us, especially our younger generation, but not exclusively. And how do we get up every morning in the midst of confronting this crisis is a challenge for all of us. And Rabbi Bellows is going to help us figure out how we navigate that. Dayenu, of course, the organization she works with and for, is a movement of American Jews confronting the climate crisis with spiritual audacity and bold political action. I just love the attitude of Dayenu. Those are their words: spiritual audacity and bold political action. I'm delighted to introduce Rabbi Laura Bellows. Do you want to call you Rabbi Laura, Rabbi Bellows, Laura? What should I call you?
You can call me Laura. You can call me Rabbi Laura. Either one.
Okay. Rabbi Laura is the director of spiritual activism and education at Dayenu, where she helps American Jewish communities face the climate crisis, draw on Jewish wisdom, and cultivate this spiritual audacity, there's that phrase again, and bold action to build a more climate-resistant, just, and joyous world for all. An experienced educator, facilitator, and activist, Rabbi Laura previously directed Prose Door at Hebrew College, Genesis at Brandeis University, and congregational programs at the Teva Learning Alliance. Rabbi Laura was ordained from Hebrew College, and she moonlights as a soferet, a ritual scribe and artist, and rabbi for couples and communities in the Boston area. Rabbi Laura, I am delighted to turn this forum over to you.
It's such a pleasure. Can I call you Rabbi Carden?
Absolutely.
Great. It's such a pleasure to be here with you and with all of you. Some of your faces I'm familiar with, some folks are new, and just a big thanks for showing up today. So again, I'm Laura, or Rabbi Laura. I'm based here in Boston, Massachusetts. Because we have a nice small group right now, can folks drop into the chat, or if you'd feel more comfortable coming off mute, and just give a quick, like, hi, here's where I'm calling in from. If you're connected to a particular congregation or community, you don't need to be. Curious to hear that. Yeah, let's take a moment. Let's take a moment to say hi.
Hi, Mike Gildersgame, Arlington, Massachusetts.
Yes.
Been a member of Temple and Muna in Lexington for a long time.
Great, Mike. Great to have you here and to see you again. Great. We have Judith calling in from Allentown. Awesome. Amy, you're in Denver. Wonderful. Temple Micah. Ariel's in Vermont. And Josh in Palm Beach. Hi, Josh. Is it really hot down there? I know Key West is crazy right now. Yeah.
It's just pretty hot.
Yeah. David's also in Denver. We've got some nice Colorado representation. Great. Great. Well, welcome. Good to be with you all. And go Denver. Awesome. And this is really an opportunity to share a bit about Dayenu's spiritual adaptation work and sort of the organization as a whole. And also because we have a nice small group, we're going to have a chance to actually do some of it, to get to be in some of the spiritual adaptation work and try it out together, a little taste of that. So I am, those days when your computer, your technology is not all working. So it's one of those days for me. So with Rabbi Cardin's help, we have some slides. So we're gonna start off with just a little bit of grounding in what Dayenu is and what we talk about when we say that organization. Awesome, thank you. Great, so you can head to the next slide. Thanks. So we launched Dayenu in 2020, actually in March of 2020. We were set to launch with a big in-person thing, and we shifted to online because we knew time was of the essence and we were going to move forward regardless. We launched to bring the power, people, and voice of American Jews to the broader movements to confront the climate crisis. We know from studies that 80% of American Jews are concerned about the climate crisis. It is something that makes the Jewish community somewhat unique among other religious or faith communities in the US, that it is of overwhelming concern to Jews. And recent surveys of the Jewish electorate show that it's a top issue for Jewish voters, and a top issue for Jewish voters under 40. But even with all of this concern, most of us are not taking action at the scale required. There are two main reasons for this. People are not sure what they can do. Many of us feel kind of helpless to figure out what to do in the face of such an overwhelming crisis. It can be difficult to face the truth of what's at stake on an emotional and a psychological scale. The kind of heart level of this crisis, if you really think about it, can be just too challenging to face. So Dayenu comes to address both of these reasons for inaction, both the helplessness and the hopelessness, to give American Jews meaningful ways to take the kinds of action that science and justice demand, and to support Jews and Jewish communities to face and move through the anxiety, the angst that climate crisis raises. And to do all of this in the context of Jewish community and rooted in Torah and drawing on music and arts. So our mission here is to secure a just, livable, and sustainable world for all people for generations to come by building a multi-generational Jewish movement that's confronting the climate crisis with spiritual audacity and bold collective action. So next slide. We know that as a result of mining, drilling, burning of coal and oil and gas for the past century, our world is already dangerously hotter, rainier, more extreme, and ultimately unequal because those who are least responsible for these emissions, namely Black, Brown, Indigenous, poor, and historically marginalized communities, are the people who are suffering first and worst from the effects of the climate crisis. I I try to be wise about how much negative climate news I consume while still keeping my feet firmly on the ground. But I know that this month we hit the 1 year mark for record global heat temperatures. That means every month of this past year has broken the record temperatures globally for heat. And that just yesterday in Key West, there is a brutal combination of heat and humidity. It's supposed to be 115 degrees down there right now, which is the highest mark on record for any time this year. So record heat waves, flooding, air quality issues from wildfires are having a long-term effect on the physical and mental health of many. I know that I won't forget, last summer I was in New York City for a staff retreat, and I took this photo that's behind the different headlines that I pasted here. That's a photo taken from Dayenu's office on the 18th floor on the Upper West Side of the Hudson River. And it was so, as someone who has asthma, it was such a scary time. It was one of my first times of really feeling some direct effects from the Canadian wildfire blazes that were made much worse by climate change. And it really, for me, brought home some of the urgency to confront this. I know I'm not alone. I know I was there with colleagues and friends, and including one colleague who was 7 months pregnant and navigating it as that. And I imagine that many of you have also experienced some of the effects of the climate crisis directly. Actually, I'm curious to see, just by show of hands, if you're thinking about climate more now than you were a few years ago. Yeah, I think many of us are. Is there anyone who wants to share briefly about an experience that you've had with effects of the climate crisis? It's okay if not.
This is not, this is not really an answer to your question exactly, but I do follow this topic in the news, and everybody remembers the Paris climate agreement. It really wasn't a treaty, it was more of an agreement that I think Trump pulled out of, if I'm not mistaken. The reason he pulled out is he said it's not fair for the United States to tackle this problem, and for others, especially the Chinese, not to be on board, and puts us at a competitive disadvantage. So
yeah, so this is there is thank you for that. There's much we could say about sort of the policy issues in this moment, and certainly that is one of the things that Dayenu is working closely on, US climate policy. And this is also, I think, one of the things that has happened in the last years and is continuing to happen is that more and more of us have some direct experiences of climate change in ways that are awakening, ways that remind us of what we love and what's at stake in this crisis. I often, when I'm talking about spiritual adaptation work, we talk a lot about what we love in this time, from our grandchildren or children or parents to the parks in our cities and being outdoors, to experiences with all different species and all life on this planet in all different ways. And the good news is we know what we need to do. So in the next slide, we know we need to slash climate pollution, or greenhouse gas emissions, sometimes we call it that, by the end of this decade, as much as possible, to build a clean energy economy that is accessible to all. We know we can't really fully stop climate change at this point, but it's not too late to prevent some of the most devastating impacts of this crisis if we act at scale and together. Dayenu is called Dayenu. It means we've had enough. And we called it that because, I'm sorry, we called Dayenu because it means enough. In the context of our organization, we mean that as both we've had enough destruction and injustice, enough of climate disasters, and we have enough. We have the people and the technology and the spiritual resources and the resilient ancestors to face this crisis and to build a just, livable world now and for future generations. So these are some images. Awkwardly, I'm in it, but I didn't put myself in it. These are some images of different folks taking action. This past Hanukkah, we did a whole postcarding action. Some people are making phone calls. That's from Isabella Friedman. That's the Adama Fellows at Isabella Friedman. And people in the bottom picture are standing up with different climate plagues as part of our All Our Might Passover action that happened 2 Passovers ago. So in the next slide, let me tell you a little bit about how we get there, how we get to a more just, livable future. A little bit about Dayenu's theory of change. So we're building people power. We're building political power, and we're building spiritual power. We're building people power by building a nationwide movement that harnesses the collective power of American Jews of every generation and background, and adds our voices to the national and global call for change, and is prepared to have an impact for the long haul. And we're building political power as well. We're advancing comprehensive federal and state climate policies in the US. This legislative cycle in particular, we've been pushing really hard in California and New York on specific policies. This Sunday, we have our second Jewish Climate Summit happening in Northern California. It doesn't seem like anyone's in Northern California, but it's happening there. It's going to be great. And we just had one in early April in Manhattan, both focused on specific state policies that will really make a difference in ensuring that everyone benefits from a green, just transition. And on a national level, our focus nearly since our launch has been to mobilize Jews writ large on national policy. So what started as a green, just recovery and then Build Back Better finally became the Inflation Reduction Act, which we played a small role in getting passed in August 2022. It is historic legislation with $370 billion in climate and energy investments, the biggest piece of climate legislation ever passed. So we're doing all of that. And beyond that, we're mobilizing American Jews at key political and cultural moments. We engage in making sure that people get out to vote to change the political landscape, and we're gearing up for the 2024 elections, and working to end financial backing of the fossil fuel industry as well. Some of you may have seen that last month, the federations in Oregon announced that they're moving their investments out of polluting fossil fuels, and the CCAR, the reform movement, just announced the same. So we have people power, we have political power, and of course, the sort of realm that I lead is spiritual power, because we know that the climate crisis is not just a political issue or an economic issue or a justice issue. It's an issue of the soul. And if the Jewish community is to remain vibrant, relevant, if Torah, it's Hayim Hi L'Machazikim Ba, if we are holding on to a living Torah, I really believe that we need to also be addressing the emotional, psychological, and spiritual impacts of this climate crisis and the existential questions that it raises. So that's why we have spiritual adaptation as one of the pillars of our work. It's grounded in Jewish wisdom, Torah, music, art. We have a whole 64-song songbook that's out now. We have a lot more. And I'm excited to share with you a little bit more about this spiritual power realm experientially. So if you go to the next slide, it says spiritual power. Yes, this is someone holding matzah at our Move Your Dough, moving our assets out of fossil fuel financing into more green and just investing a couple Passovers ago. And we are accidentally muted myself. There we are. So if you're here, you probably know that Judaism compels us to pursue justice, aligning our actions with our values and working in solidarity with the most vulnerable in our societies, and engaging in the work of making this world more whole. So we are gonna go on a little adventure. In the next slide is a taste of the journey that we usually take in a spiritual adaptation workshop. We just hit our 40th workshop this spring. We've been leading spiritual adaptation workshops based on this spiral in communities across the US. Actually, I was in Denver in October. I've been to many of the other places where folks live here. And we are ramping up this work in the coming years. This is inspired by many parts of Jewish tradition. And this particular spiral is from something called The Work That Reconnects by Joanna Macy, who is an amazing writer, activist, eco-theologian, and Buddhist living in Northern California. She's in her 90s now. And she says that it's helpful to not just talk about action, but to also have spaces where we get to start in gratitude, honor our pain for the world, some of what's at stake in this crisis and what we're afraid of, grieving, angry about, some of those hard climate emotions, in order to then move to new possibilities. What is the new possibility? What is the world that we are building? And what is the world that we want to be moving towards? And then going forth into action. So usually these workshops take place over the course of 2.5 to 3 hours. So we are just going to dip our toes into one part of the spiral today. And I hope it comes as a relief that it's not going to be just the honoring our pain for the world. We are going to go into opening to new possibilities. There's been a big move in the last few years by people working on some of the emotional psychological effects of climate toward the importance of imagination. Author Rebecca Solnit, who I'm sure some of you are familiar with, writes that in order to do what the climate crisis demands of us, we have to find stories of a livable future, stories of popular power, stories that motivate people to do what it takes to make the world we need. We need those stories. And part of our work in this age of climate reality is imagining what else is possible, leaning into that kind of thinking. Jewish communities, thankfully, have been doing this for a long time. We're not new to it. To become a free people back in biblical times, the enslaved Israelites needed grit and perseverance and imagination to think beyond what their status quo was, beyond their current reality, and to flee across the Red Sea into an entirely new reality. Many of us, too, are here because we have parents or grandparents, or maybe we ourselves, or great-grandparents who took huge risks imagining and building whole new lives for themselves, so that Lidor Vador, so that from generation to generation, they and future generations could thrive. So in this little taste of the spiral in this third part, we're going to exercise that muscle of imagination and root ourselves in Midrash as both a practice and a source text. Midrash, is there anyone who wants to give a little definition of Midrash? I see some folks on here who might be excited to. Let's do it. You can drop in the chat. You don't have to know what it is. Just curious, like what definitions we have in the room.
Biblical-based stories and reflections.
Thanks. Great. Yeah, biblical-based stories and reflections. Ariel's bringing in a contemporary classic definition. Love it. Rabbinic fanfic, meaning some of the stories and reflections that expound upon the core text. Commentary, I sometimes think of Midrash also as like Midrash, classical Midrash especially, comes in at moments of uncertainty and moments when like you're reading the text and it's a moment when you might have a question like, wait, who said that? Or like, wait, how did they get from point A to point C? And it's really, it's a really rich literary tradition that helps fill in some of the gaps in what we know, creating stories, sometimes wildly imaginative stories, to help us perceive that which is not yet known. So when I think about what it takes and what Jewish wisdom we have about confronting an uncertain future, Midrash has been one of my go-tos as a source of inspiration and also a reminder that there are many generations of Jewish ancestors and people today writing Midrashim who are flexing their imagination and writing into those gaps in what we know, writing into the unknown in different ways. So I want to share with you a short little Midrash, one of the ones that my colleague and our rabbinic student fellow for spiritual adaptation this year, Chloe Zelka, she found this and introduced me to it. It's from Pesichta de Rav Kahana, which Pesichta de Rav Kahana, if you don't know it, it's one of the particularly wild and fun ones. It's 5th to 6th century Eretz Yisrael. It's one of the earliest collections of Midrashim. And in Pesichta de Rav Kahana, the story goes that there's a Beit Midrash, a study hall. Rabbi Yochanan, famous teacher, is sitting in his Beit Midrash, and his students and him are having a conversation and about the moment when the Israelites were leaving Egypt. We've been at Dayenu particularly studying Midrashim about moments of great transition and reinvention as a way of, again, drawing Jewish wisdom that speaks to moments of climate crisis. So Rabbi Yochanan's students turn to him and they say, Rabbi Yochanan, what was it like when the Israelites crossed the sea? Like, actually, when they were crossing? Like, okay, so it was dry ground, but like, what did the walls of the sea look like? And Rabbi Yochanan, right, again, this is like many, generations after the crossing of the sea, Rabbi Yochanan says, oh, well, it looked like lattice work, like windows. The walls of the sea looked like windows. And at that moment, in the window of the Beit Midrash, they hear a voice. There's an old woman who appears there and says, it was not like that. And the students say, who are you? And she says, I am Serach bat Asher. Serach bat Asher is incredible, mythical, one of the few women named in Torah. And she is someone who was supposedly lived from the time of Joseph to the time after the crossing of the sea, and generations later to show up in the window of Rabbi Yochanan's Beit Midrash, and some say she is still with us. So in the window, Serach bat Asher says, I was there, and it was not like that. I saw the walls of the sea, and they actually looked like mirrors. They were shining like mirrors, and in the mirrors were reflected everyone who was crossing, all the people crossing together, and all past generations and all generations to come together. And then it goes on to talk about, well, how many people was that? Was that this? But I won't get into that. But I love this Midrash because it really speaks to this moment that we're in, what it means to be crossing in a time of great transition with generations that have come before us, and also with, in so many ways, the generations that are to come, are yet to come, that we are really at a pivotal moment in history. And for this exercise that we're about to try out, what we're going to do is actually collapse time a little bit. So in this Midrash, we have authors of the Midrash writing in the 5th or 6th century about a Beit Midrash from Rabbi Yochanan in maybe the 2nd century or so, 3rd century. And then they're writing about the time of the crossing of the sea, many sort of mythical generations earlier. So we too are going to collapse time. We're going to have a little conversation between a future being and someone living today called an ancestor. So first of all, can I just see the folks who are, I see, let's see, we haven't even, this, just to ask, this is gonna require some quick breakout rooms. Easy, we'll come back together. We'll talk about what we can do about climate and move to going forth. But I just want to see whether the folks who are off camera are actually like there. And if I can just get like a thumbs up, or if you can come on camera, great. Good to see you. Cool, got a thumbs up from Ariel. Great. I think we have enough people to do that, to do this then. And Amy and David, if you're down to join us, would love that too. So the way this is going to work is I call this exercise Le Door by Door, and actually you can move ahead, Rabbi Carden, to the next slide is a little, we're going to keep going. This is the Midrash I just shared. Happy to share it later if you're interested, and go to the next one. Okay, so here's our ancestors and future beings. So the way this exercise is going to work is one person is, you'll be in a pair. One person will be the ancestor living in the year 2024 today. And the other person is going to be a future being living in the year 2200. Oh, it's on the screen. Great. 2200. So about 174, 76 years from now. And when I say ancestor, I don't mean just bloodline or lineage. I mean expansively, someone living today, talking to someone living in the future. And the way it's going to work is you're going to read a script, and that will guide you through this. So if you're the person in your pair whose first name comes first in the alphabet, then you're going to be the ancestor. So like if Nina and I were, Rabbi Carden and I were in a pair, Laura comes before Nina, I would be the ancestor, and Rabbi Carden would be the future being living in the year 2200. And you'll read the script going back and forth, and each of you will have a chance to respond, to sort of listen actively and then to respond. So for the sake of this, a couple of assumptions. One is that humans are alive and thriving and living in a thriving ecosystem in the year 2200. And I know that for some of us, this is hard. This is a leap. This is like not easy to imagine. I think some of us have come to believe otherwise. But for the sake of this exercise and for the important practice of flexing our imagination of the world that we want so that we can then work towards that, this is the world that you want. So lean into it, have fun with it, like live it up, all the things you might be dreaming of in an actual thriving world 176 years from now. And the other assumption is that future beings have some cultural memory of what is happening today in our time. So in other words, 200 years from now, humans know about our world today. So you'll speak in the first person as the ancestor or future being, and I'll keep track of time. I'll send out a little like update. Here's, time to move on kind of thing. And I'm going to go ahead and drop the script for this into the chat. So I think that, first of all, let me just pause and say, are there questions at this point about how this works? You'll open the script, you'll see it. I'll tell you when to move on to the next. Great. The next person. And I think we're in pretty good shape. Okay, I think we're good. So we might have a group of 3, that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and send folks into breakout rooms. And in order to get to this time outside of time, again, this is just kind of a taste of, I know we haven't had a lot of time to get into this headspace. But in order to get into this time outside of time, I just want to invite folks for a moment to close your eyes if you feel comfortable, to let your shoulders drop, to stretch a little, whatever way feels good. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. You should have an invitation to a breakout room. And you can go ahead and enter it and find out if you're a future being or an ancestor. Turn this back on just so those who aren't here can learn too. So welcome back. We are now back in the year 2024, where we have an incredible opportunity to affect change in a way that we may not have in future generations. We likely won't have in future generations. There's really pretty clear science now that we are the last or one of the last generations to be able to make a big difference on climate and have the power to do so. So I'm curious to hear from ancestors or future beings what that was like for you. We're just going to take 1 minute to talk about how that was for you. Anything that you heard that surprised you or that you want to hold on to? Anything that came up for you?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, a much more immediate existential threat to the planet is nuclear proliferation and nuclear war. So that's likely to, so that's what I said as the future person. I wish you had done more to stop these rogue entities, whether they're states or other organizations, from going nuclear, because I mean, I guess nuclear war will cause a nuclear winter as well, right? So that maybe
You were the future being?
future, I said basically the world as you knew it has ceased to exist because of a nuclear holocaust, you could say.
Wow, well, chas v'shalom, may that not happen. Thank you for sharing. Is that a hand, David? No.
Yeah.
Judith?
So David and I were future people, and Ariel was our ancestor. And David and I shared that we also had a hard time imagining a world that was better in 2200. And as David said, we've been hoping it won't get much worse. That seems like and David, tell me if I'm misquoting you. It seems like what we aim for is to keep it from getting too much worse. And the idea that it would be much better was kind of hard to wrap our heads around. I've found it hard to do. It would be wonderful, but so I guess we need more imagination. Is that?
I mean, it is, I think it's a common experience that I hear people like struggling to get there. I hope that at some point we can be in a longer form workshop together, because it really is, because it's possible. And I think, when we really lean into that kind of imagination, particularly when we have, more spacious time to do so, whether through writing, through talking it out with someone else, through, leaning into those moments where we see some of the solutions at work in the headlines of the newspaper. Sometimes we have to search out those news sources because they don't tend to make the headlines. But there are so many people who are doing incredible work right now to really move the dial on climate and to try to make a difference in this time. We know that every 10th of a degree of carbon in the atmosphere means lives saved. That this is both an existential threat and that we have tremendous power to do something about it. So I want to share with you a couple of ways. I mentioned spiritual power, political power, and people power. I just want to share with you some ways that that we can take action. This is, generally in a spiritual adaptation workshop, we would, again, spend some ample time on going forth and how we move towards action and what's the vision of getting towards that more just, livable world. But for now, we're just going to touch upon it. If Rabbi Cardin, would you be up for sharing the slides again? Thank you. And actually, you can head right to, yeah, you can head right to the one that says People Power, number 12.
All
Thanks.
right, wait, let me find the slides. Now, I think I unfortunately closed it. Let me go to my chat so I can get
No
that
problem.
again.
So I'm curious in the meantime, is there anyone here I know Mike has been involved, but is there anyone here who's been involved in a Dayenu circle? By show of hands? Okay, cool. So we have many examples in Jewish tradition of leaders who did speak up to face great odds. And these individuals did not act alone. They were backed by friends and family, movements for liberation and justice, safety and dignity. And similarly, to face the climate crisis, we too need to act as communities and as a movement. We know that individual action is important, but it's not enough. We have to also be acting at scale and together. So in the next slide, I think we have a group of people. This is in Northern Virginia. This is a group from Temple Road of Shalom in Northern Virginia and some of our Dayenu circle leaders. We're building people power, particularly through these networks of Dayenu circles. Dayenu circles, you can go to the next slide, are groups of people who are locally based, working together on bold collective climate action. So circles can be based on campuses or in synagogues or neighborhoods, or simply among a group of local friends. Joining or starting a circle is a great way to make positive change locally and nationally with a Jewish voice. So we have now nearly 100 Dayenu circles across the country. Again, based in many different types of communities. We have some that are young people circles and most that are multi-generational. And many of our circles have been active on local policy or on postcarding on Hanukkah. We had a big action then, or tapped in with the support of Dayenu staff to a national network pushing for federal climate policies. And we have about 150 other circles that are in various states of formation right now. So there's every month I hear of like new circles joining this network. It's pretty awesome. You can check out dayenu.org/circles to learn more and to get more info. There is, if you go to the next slide. Okay, a little bit about Dayenu circles. I already talked about that. It's a great way to make powerful change. They have autonomy to work on their own issues and campaigns, but also are connected with a national network with support from our staff. So next slide. Thanks. So Bill McKibben, famous climate author, writes, "The most important thing an individual can do is be less of an individual and join movements sharp enough to make change." So if, Rabbi Cardin, if you can move ahead now a couple more slides. Thank you. I'm just gonna whiz through. These are some images of our political power, our different campaigns. Go one more. Great. So I want to make sure that I get to share with you before we wrap a few of the ways that you can join us. One of the best ways is, I know no one wants more email. We try to be very judicious in our emails, but sign up to find out about what's happening next. Sign up to find out about spiritual adaptation workshops in your city, in your region. Sign up to find out about our new campaign that's launching in the next few weeks. That's called Chutzpah 2024. It's a campaign to get out the vote across the country in a nonpartisan way. It's great for congregations or organizations. And it's a lot of fun. We make sure that we have live music and kavanot, bits of Torah, at every phone banking shift. It's a lot of fun. So chutzpah is coming up. Sign up to find out more about that. If you want to start or join a Dayenu circle, again, you can check out dayenu.org/circles. And if you're interested in learning more about Dayenu's spiritual adaptation work, you can join one of our workshops online, which we host throughout the year, or apply to host a workshop in your community. We offer them fully funded across the country, a limited number each year. You can find out more at dayenu.org/spiritual-adaptation, or check out any number of resources that are up on the dayenu.org resources page. So I'm going to put a few of these in the chat so that you have them. And yeah, put dayenu.org circles as well. Those are some great ways to get involved. I think at this point, let's go ahead and take down the slides. Thank you so much for your help with that. And we are at time. So I'm going to go ahead and just say that anyone who would like to stay on and chat or ask questions, I'm happy to stay on for a couple minutes. But a big thanks to all of you for coming, for trying out that exercise in a short time, and for the work that you're doing. I'm grateful to be in this work with you.
And
Nice to meet everybody.
thank you so much for taking us through this. I'm very curious about more of your work in spiritual adaptation. I hope others are too. So please take advantage of Rabbi Laura's invitation. I also put in the chat a link to our other webinar registrations if you want to participate in that. Thank you all for showing up. Thank you all for your interest. Be sure to share this recording when you get it. And I hope to see you at some future webinars.